Imagine you're walking barefoot in your living room, and you accidentally step on a rogue Lego brick. Immediately, your foot jerks back, and you feel that sharp, awful flash of pain. We all know how this works, right? But what if, instead of feeling pain, that exact same brain state and physical reaction were accompanied by a feeling of intense, blissful pleasure? You'd be actively destroying your foot while feeling ecstatic. It sounds absurd, but why doesn't that happen? Today, we are diving into a fascinating paper by philosophers Brian Cutter and Dustin Crummett titled Psychophysical Harmony, a New Argument for Theism. We're going to unpack why the way our minds and bodies sync up isn't just biologically useful, but philosophically shocking.
It really is a mind-bending topic. Grab your coffee, because we are going deep today. What Cutter and Crummett are doing here is shifting the focus. Traditionally, the mind-body problem asks how consciousness and physical matter interact. But this paper asks something entirely different. It points out that the phenomenal states we experience, like the feeling of pain or the visual experience of seeing the color red, are correlated with our physical states in an incredibly lucky, value-laden way. They call this exact explanandum psychophysical harmony, and they argue that this harmony is incredibly hard to explain under naturalism, but makes perfect sense under theism.
Let's break down that explanandum, because the authors divide psychophysical harmony into two main dimensions. The first step in their argument focuses on something called normative harmony. What exactly does that mean, and how does it play out in our daily lives?
Normative harmony refers to the systematic match between the intrinsic normative role of a conscious state and the causal or functional role of the physical state it's linked to. Let's use the Lego example. That's what the authors call hedonic harmony. The physical brain state associated with stepping on a Lego executes an avoidance function. It makes you pull your foot away. Now, the laws of nature map that specific brain state to the phenomenal feeling of pain, which has an intrinsic badness to it. It gives you a rational reason to avoid it. If the laws of nature randomly map that avoidance-producing brain state to the feeling of an orgasm, your behavior would be completely irrational. You'd be pulling away from something you desperately want.
Right, and there's another subcategory there called epistemic harmony, right? It's not just about pleasure and pain, but about how we form beliefs about the world.
Exactly. Epistemic harmony is about knowledge. When your brain is in a state that causes you to reach out and grab a spherical object, the physical laws happen to map that brain state to the visual experience of seeing a sphere. That visual experience justifies your belief that there is a sphere in front of you. If the laws of nature mapped that grabbing behavior to the visual experience of seeing a triangle, your beliefs would be completely out of sync with reality.
Now, I can already hear the biology enthusiasts screaming through their headphones. They're going to say, wait a minute. Evolution explains this perfectly. The organisms that felt pleasure when stepping on a fire died out, and the ones that felt pain survived. Natural selection sorted this out millions of years ago. How do Cutter and Crummett respond to that?
That is the most common immediate reaction, but it entirely misses the point. Evolution selects for physical behavior. It selects the organism whose brain state causes the foot to pull away from the fire. But evolution does not dictate the psychophysical laws that attach a specific subjective feeling to that physical brain state. Evolution just presupposes that harmony. It assumes the law that maps brain state X to pain is already in place. If the fundamental laws of nature mapped brain state X to pleasure, evolution would still select for brain state X because it causes the foot to pull away. But the organism would be living an absurd inner life, constantly being forced to avoid the things it enjoys. Evolution cannot explain the psychophysical laws themselves.
Okay, so evolution is off the table as an explanation. Let's move to step 3. How do naturalistic philosophers try to push back against this normative harmony? Because if you're a strict naturalist, admitting that the universe is loaded with these intrinsic objective values like the badness of pain is pretty uncomfortable.
The naturalists essentially have two main escape routes, and the paper argues both fail. The first is normative error theory. This is the radical claim that there are no normative facts at all. The idea that pain is intrinsically bad or that an experience justifies a belief is just an illusion. Cutter and Crummett dismiss this because it is extremely implausible. The fact that agony is intrinsically bad is a self-evident philosophical truth. If you deny that, you've lost touch with reality.
Yeah, it's hard to take a philosopher seriously if they are currently on fire, and claiming the badness of the experience is just an illusion. What's the second naturalistic pushback?
The second one is contingent normative roles. This is the idea that the badness of pain isn't intrinsic to the feeling itself, but is derived from its functional role. In other words, pain is only bad because it makes you pull your foot away. But the authors refute this brilliantly. Think about a disembodied Cartesian mind, a mind floating in the void with no physical body, no physical outputs, and no evolutionary history. If that disembodied mind suddenly experienced intense, agonizing pain, that pain would still be intrinsically bad, even though it serves zero functional role. This proves the normative value is tied to the phenomenal experience itself, not the physical output.
That perfectly sets up step 4. We've covered normative harmony, but the paper introduces a second, completely independent dimension called semantic harmony, and they tie this to something called the meta-problem of consciousness. I know this is a heavy concept, but it's crucial. Walk us through it.
Semantic harmony is mind-blowing. It points out that the psychophysical laws ensure our introspective judgments about our experiences are actually made true by the experiences themselves. So, when your physical vocal cords vibrate and say, "I am having a conscious experience of a red circle," you actually possess that exact conscious experience. To explain why this is so weird, the authors point to the meta-problem of consciousness.
The meta-problem being the question of why we humans go around talking about consciousness in the first place, right?
Yes. Assuming the physical world is causally closed, our physical brains talking about the hard problem of consciousness or reporting our inner feelings can be completely explained by physical neuroscience. Our lips moving and writing philosophy papers are physical events. But the miracle is that the content of those physical reports happens to be perfectly aligned with the invisible, phenomenal reality inside our minds.
And they use a really helpful analogy here to make this concrete, right? The two text machines. I love this part because it clarifies the difference between mere correlation and actual semantic correspondence.
Exactly. Imagine text machine 1. Whenever a red light flashes, the machine prints out a random string of letters, and it also emits a beep. The beep and the printed letters are correlated because they share a common cause, the red light. That's not mysterious. But now imagine text machine 2. A red light flashes, and the machine prints out the English word hi, and simultaneously emits a high-pitched audio tone. When it prints low, it emits a low-pitched tone. That is a semantic correspondence. The physical output actually describes the secondary phenomenon. For text machine 2, you can't just say, they share a common cause. You have to conclude the machine was intelligently designed to match the meaning of the word with the pitch of the sound. Our brains are like text machine 2.
So, out of all the nearly infinite ways psychophysical laws could have mapped our brain states to phenomenal states, maybe mapping the phrase, "I see red," to the smell of garlic, or just a constant buzzing noise, it happened to map it perfectly. This brings us to step 5, the core Bayesian argument. How do the authors take this massive lucky coincidence and turn it into evidence for theism?
They use a likelihood comparison. In Bayesian probability, you look at how likely the evidence is under different hypotheses. The authors state that the probability of harmony given theism is vastly greater than the probability of harmony given atheism. Under naturalistic atheism, psychophysical laws are just brute, contingent facts. The vast majority of conceivable mappings lead to disharmony. Even the simplest mappings, like every brain state causing the same monotonous buzz, lead to disharmony. So, under atheism, the probability of hitting this exact harmonious mapping is vanishingly small.
But under theism, God has a reason to make things harmonious.
Precisely. If a perfectly good rational God exists, God would want to create beings capable of rational action, reliable cognition, and meaningful introspection. Psychophysical harmony is the necessary prerequisite for all those things. Therefore, harmony is highly expected under theism. Now, some critics try to parody this by bringing up the cheese god, a hypothetical god whose sole purpose is to maximize cheese in the universe. They argue you could make up any god to explain anything.
Right, the classic ad hoc objection. How do Cutter and Crummett deal with the cheese god or the evil god challenge?
They point out that traditional theism is not an ad hoc hypothesis. It has a high prior probability because of its ontological simplicity and naturalness, positing an omnipotent, omniscient, completely good mind as the foundation of reality is a fundamentally unified concept. The cheese god is just a manufactured, highly complex, and arbitrary hypothesis. As for the evil god challenge, the idea of a god who wants to maximize suffering, the authors note that this concept has already been thoroughly weakened by existing philosophical literature, and it doesn't fit the data of the harmony we actually observe. Even if you factor in the problem of evil and the suffering in the world, as long as theism's prior probability isn't literally zero, the profound evidence of psychophysical harmony dramatically raises the posterior probability of theism.
Let's move to step 6. A lot of people listening might be thinking, this is a great argument if you are a Cartesian dualist who believes the mind is a totally separate ghost in the physical machine. But what if I'm a physicalist? What if I believe the mind just is the brain? Does the argument collapse if we drop dualism or accept the causal closure of the physical?
This is one of the strongest parts of the paper. The argument is metaphysically neutral. It absolutely does not require dualism. Let's look at physicalist functionalism, which says that the feeling of pain just is a specific functional state of the brain. The authors use a concept similar to the famous Boulder Island analogy to expose the flaw here.
Oh, the Boulder Island analogy is great. Let's explain that for the audience. Imagine you arrive at an uninhabited island and you find a bunch of giant boulders perfectly arranged into a fully functional, weatherproof house. If you ask a physicalist how it got there, they can't just say, well, a functional house is identical to this specific arrangement of boulders, so there's nothing to explain.
Exactly. Identity is not an explanation. Even if the property of being a house is identical to that functional arrangement of rocks, you still have to explain the miraculous luck of the rocks landing in that exact arrangement rather than a scattered pile. The same applies to the mind. Even if the phenomenal badness of pain is identical to functional state F, why did reality turn out such that the feeling of agony is identical to functional state F, which causes avoidance, instead of functional state F star, which causes us to seek it out? It is still an experiential lottery. So even if functionalism has a high prior probability, the harmony is still stunning evidence. And this applies equally to idealism and Russellian monism. No matter your metaphysics, you still have to explain why the foundational stuff of the universe was dealt such a lucky, harmonious hand.
Which brings us to the final, desperate counter-argument. Step 7. When naturalists face wildly improbable odds, they usually pull the emergency cord and deploy the multiverse hypothesis. In the fine-tuning of the universe argument, atheists say, well, if there are infinite universes with different laws, of course we find ourselves in the one that supports life, because we couldn't exist to observe the dead ones. Does the multiverse destroy the psychophysical harmony argument?
It completely fails here because psychophysical harmony lacks a strong observation selection effect. Let me explain. In cosmological fine-tuning, the laws of physics must be precisely tuned just for carbon-based life to exist at all, so you have a selection effect. But with consciousness, we could easily be observers in a severely disharmonious universe. A minimal amount of harmony might be required just to be a functioning observer, but the harmony we actually experience goes way, way beyond that bare minimum. We have precise, multimodal, highly detailed harmony across our entire cognitive spectrum.
It sounds very similar to the Boltzmann brain problem in cosmology.
It is the exact same logic. A purely random naturalistic multiverse predicts that the vast majority of conscious observers should be momentary Boltzmann brains, brains that just fluctuate into existence from thermal chaos with false memories, existing for a second before dissolving. The fact that we observe a stable, highly ordered, beautifully harmonious reality is strong evidence against a random multiverse and strong evidence for a purposeful creator. If we were just a random fluctuation in a multiverse, we should expect our senses to be mostly chaotic, maybe with inverted pain or massive semantic mismatches. But we don't see that.
We've journeyed through incredibly dense terrain here. We started with the sheer luck of pain making us pull away from fire, moved through the failure of evolutionary and naturalistic explanations, explored the meta-problem of why our physical words match our invisible feelings, and survived the gauntlets of physicalism and the multiverse. So, bringing it all together, what is the exact conclusion Cutter and Crummett reach? Are they saying this is a mathematical proof that God exists?
No, they are very careful not to overstate their case, but they are also not watering it down. The actual conclusion of the paper is that the existence of psychophysical harmony is strong evidence for theism. They argue that the argument from psychophysical harmony deserves an important place alongside the traditional theistic arguments, like the cosmological or teleological arguments. They also make a fair concession. While it points strongly to theism, it could also lend support to theistic, adjacent hypotheses like John Leslie's axiarchism or Thomas Nagel's teleological universe, where the universe has a fundamental, built-in drive toward realizing value.
It's a fascinating shift in the conversation. It tells us that we shouldn't just be wondering how the ghost got into the machine, but we should be absolutely awestruck by the fact that the ghost and the machine are perfectly reading from the exact same script.
Perfectly said. If the universe isn't purposefully directed toward value, then the fact that your conscious mind and your physical brain are singing in perfect harmony is a coincidence so massive it defies belief. It forces us to look at our everyday experiences, even just stepping on a Lego, with a profound sense of philosophical wonder.
And that is a perfect place to leave it for today. Thank you all for joining us in the coffee shop for this deep dive on philosophical frontiers. Keep questioning, keep wondering, and we'll see you next time.